We're seeing a lot of stats around people in city government and just government in general really hitting burnout and wanting to take a break, which of course I have complete compassion for. And I just think the acknowledgement that we are in a transformative time and we need time and space, permission and incentives to think creatively, not just with people in our department or within city hall walls, but outside of the community. And that can feel a little risky, but it's really critical. And the cities who are doing that, or the cities that are doing that, I think are pushing in the right direction.
Hi, Smart Community friends. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a wonderful conversation with Chelsea Collier, the founder of Digi.City, a forum for supporting the co-creation of smarter cities and more connected communities. Now, you may remember Chelsea from her last episode way back in 2018 in episode 23. And we are so excited to have her back on the podcast again. Chelsea starts off by telling us about her background and her current work running her online forum Digi.City, her passion for tech and bringing government, public sectors, industry and academia together, and Chelsea tells us how she got into this smart community space. Chelsea then tells us how she started her consultancy, Digi.City, before telling us what a smart community means to her. We then discuss the smart community definition and how the definition is quite simple, yet the smart community applications are far more complex to implement. Then Chelsea tells us what she's been up to since we last recorded in 2018. Chelsea then tells us a bit about some of her key projects she's been working on, and we discuss the importance of bringing councils together and co-creation and collaboration with the community. We finish our chat discussing the emerging trends of data visualization and using data to make better decisions for our communities. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the smart community, smart regions, smart towns, and smart cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Well, hello, Chelsea, and welcome back to the Smart Community Podcast. I'm so excited for you to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be back on. The world has changed a little bit since we last spoke, but super thrilled that this is the continuous thread.
Yes, it sure has. Yeah, anyway, we'll get into that. But let's start with you. Can you tell us about your background and what you are passionate about?
Sure. Yeah. So I run an online forum called Digi.City. And our focus is on the intersection of smart cities and social impact. So I'm passionate, yes, about technology, but I see that as more of the enabler. What I really care about is bringing people across sectors. And I define those as 4 different sectors. Of course, government, public sector, industry, and that can be everything from young startups to global corporates, academia, and then, of course, the social and nonprofit sector. And I think it's somewhat rare for those 4 communities to be together in the smart city conversation, but I think it's a real rich area, and we're just starting to explore it. So lots of work to do.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love your approach, and obviously been following for a long time. And last we had a conversation was 2019 when we were in Denver in person, which was very exciting, which just seems wild now, at Smart Cities Connect conference, which was amazing. But then before that on the podcast, it was actually May 2018, and you were episode 23 of, well, it's crazy to think about. And we were the Smart City podcast back then. So thank you for being a pioneer and a early adopter of, the podcast, because we couldn't have started without our very early people that went, oh, this isn't really a thing, but yeah, sure, I'll come on, I'll talk to you. So thank you for joining me that way back when.
Right back at you. I mean, thanks for hosting this conversation and doing it so consistently. There's a lot of people who kind of bungee jump in and out of smart cities, which is okay. That's not a criticism. But I have a lot of respect for people like yourself who host the conversation and bring and convene all the different players together. I think that storytelling piece is a really important part of our history as we're defining what's next.
No, thank you. And again, it's why we started the podcast, to continue that story. And, we know that it was very hypey back in the day, smart city, and then we moved to smart community. Well, we moved the conversation onto smart communities, but the people that are in it and that are in it for genuine reasons are because we know that it's the way forward, right? It's not this add-on. It's a really necessary conversation that we need to have. Not even conversation, we have conversation on the podcast, but then that leads to the action that we need for the future of our communities. But let's go back a little bit, because obviously 2018, people might not have listened to episode 23 for quite a while. So tell us about how you got into this space and how you really, tell us how you got into the space first, and then we'll go into what you've been doing since 2018.
Yeah, it's a long story that I'll summarize and make pretty short. Over my career, I think I've worked in pretty much every single sector. I started my career in a small advertising agency in El Paso, Texas, of all places, and then always felt this pull to do more with the community. And so I returned to Austin, Texas, which is where I live now. And I went to school at the University of Texas at Austin way back in the day. And I worked for nonprofits for a bit, and then felt, okay, I really want to do something on the policy side around economic development and economic impact. And so I went to work for a state agency. So I worked for state government. And then after a few years of that, really understood what bureaucracy is like and some of the challenges that come with trying to be entrepreneurial in government, which is not easy to do. So I went and worked for a tech startup that focused on a social good mission and loved that work. It was, of course, all the ups and downs of startup. And 2010, I said, okay, I think I'm ready to pull all of these things together. And I formed my own consulting agency in 2010. So through that course, I've just been in the middle, pulling sectors together, trying to, be a translator and sometimes a therapist between people with very different and opposing sometimes views. In 2016, I applied for an Eisenhower Fellowship, and they were gracious enough to give me the option to study whatever I wanted to study, wherever I wanted to study it. And so I thought, this kind of subject called smart cities, I don't know too much about it, but if I can find out on a fellowship, that's what I will do. And I will go to China to do that. So it was an incredible experience. In Digi.City, which is the forum that I run now, was started as a blog, just sharing what I was learning on my fellowship. So it's been quite an adventure.
Yeah. And it's so amazing to see that it started as a blog, and I think that's a really good story to tell, but also that, it's not just, that started as a blog and now it's a company. The work that you've put in from then, and the consistency, and just really, I guess, understanding what smart cities is, but then also taking your view on it as well. Because I know, when we have initial conversation, I probably didn't even appreciate it as much back then, is we really brought the people and the social impact and all those type of things in from the very beginning, which I think is quite telling in now the success, I guess, and that it's continued from then as well, is really key.
Thank you. Yeah, I just decided Digi.City started, it really is just an extension of curiosity and my personal passion. And I did what I would never do in a normal kind of client situation. I started out without a game plan. I didn't have a business plan. I didn't have goals. I didn't have an end in mind. I just let it kind of organically flow and be driven with what my mind was wanting to understand and what my heart was telling me needed to be explored. So that is sometimes a little daunting, where you wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And why am I doing all of this? And you want to kind of put some hows and some what's into the equation. But I just somehow knew that if I led with the why and the who and just kept along this path inspired by all of these people, just such experts in their field. It's so much fun to learn from them and let that be the guide as opposed to being overwhelmed or, let's be honest, intimidated. So I just kept at it and here we are.
Yes. Thanks so much for saying the word intimidated, because I think that's really key. And obviously that's not what we're here to talk about today, but it's part of the story, right? People don't get into the space, smart cities, smart communities, technology, data, because they feel intimidated by the level of expertise that already exists. But I just think we need to change that narrative because we need the experiences of all types of different people from all backgrounds, engagement people, from policy, from whatever the background is. I think that's really, really important. And then understanding that the seat at the table is yours, but you need to take it. Unfortunately, no one's going to bring it out for you. There's no one going to say, come on, join it. Well, there will be, but you still need to take it at the end of the day. And I think that's really important and has been, now going through this pandemic, it's more important than ever that we are thinking about what tech and data are doing to us and for us and with us. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. And thank you for bringing that up. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of where this whole space is headed. And I think that idea of a seat at the table, it's, yes, no one is going to, perhaps be benevolent and say, oh, here, we're pulling out this chair. And if we flip that paradigm, it's our responsibility. And, whatever our perspective, our background, our gifts, our questions that we don't have answers to, those are valid. Those are needed. And I think with some of the city makers that I've been fortunate to work with, they want to know. They just don't always have the mechanisms to ask, and they don't exactly know the questions to ask. So then we all come from a level playing field because we're all coming from a place of not knowing, but really wanting to try. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now, I want to go back to the beginning a little bit, because when you came on in 2018, we were the Smart City podcast. So I would have asked you, what is a smart city to you? What does it mean to you? So let's go to now. We are the Smart Community podcast. So what is a smart community to you?
Yeah, I used to think that was a very complex answer. And now, after kind of swimming around in this space for 5 years now, which seems, a lifetime, it really just comes down to the intersection of people, data, and devices. It's really quite simple. Applying those to complex city systems or urban systems, that is challenging. How people invite and adapt to change and how they get out of their comfort zones and work together, that is challenging. But really, the concept of smart cities is just data and analytics applied to urban systems. That's pretty simple, actually. And that kind of took a lot of heat off of me personally, just to be able to say, it's simple. The application can be very difficult, but at its core, it's really pretty straightforward.
Yeah. And I like that. And I think the concept is simple. The application is the complex part. That's also really key, because I think sometimes we think we have to have a really complex definition or whatever, and then we think, once we've got that, then it'll be easy to implement, which we know is not the case. Like any project, even like building a bridge. We're going to build a bridge, it's going to go from here to here, and we want it to connect to the community in this way. Actually building the bridge is quite a complex, there's so many people, a complex process, engineering, you've got all these different people involved, like disciplines, galore. And then actually when you're implementing it, things change and things shift, we learn, we test and try things potentially if it's a new approach. So I think, it's a similar kind of concept. And I hadn't actually thought about it like that at all until you just said that. So thanks for bringing that to the podcast, because I think that's a really key one, because if we can get people engaged in a simple, concept, then we can unlock their brains to then work out some of that complexity of the application.
Yeah. And I think we're hardwired to want to make things easier than they actually are. And we can get there if we do some of the more challenging work up front. And I've always been really inspired by colleagues in Sweden, because that's just part of the culture of how they look at problem solving. They spend a lot of time on the front end understanding different people's perspective. And I know I'm being very stereotypical here, but this is just one of the insights I had once I had the opportunity to visit there a few times. They spend a lot of time on the front end understanding who's in the room, who's the decision maker, who's supporting, who's not in the room, what are the perspectives. And there's, this kind of idea of kind of consensus where there's not one objective driving. I think that is really important, and we don't do enough of it just in the US. I know your podcast is global, of course, and I'm coming from a very American perspective. So I think a lot of the work that we have to do in smart cities is not on the technical side. It's on the human side, on understanding who our community stakeholders are, formalizing that, and then giving space for people to voice their opinion. And using your bridge analogy, I think it's a really good one. We kind of rush to build the bridge before stopping to ask, do we need a bridge? Who's going to be on this bridge? Is it in the right place? Are we moving people from where they are to where they want to go? Is that the right thing? And so we may not need a bridge at all if that's, we kind of follow that formula. So, but it's a very different way of thinking than we do in the US. So some work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think taking that analogy further, maybe we actually need a, better internet connection rather than a bridge, like maybe it's just that the people want to talk. It's not necessarily that they want to, be in the two different places at the same time or whatever the case is. So I think we've taken that bridge analogy to the end.
Yeah, they're pretty
hard. Cool. Okay. Now I want to know, although this is a big question, 2018, bit of a different time in the world, in our lives. Just trying to remember what we were doing. Well, May 2018 was when the episode was released, but I reckon we would have recorded either late 2017 or very early 2018. And then we met up again in 2019 in Denver, which was amazing as well. So what are the key highlights or the things that has changed since 2018? And I guess first of all, let's start there and then we'll go to the future.
Yeah, it's been an important time for me personally and professionally. 2018, 2019, I look back at the pace that I was maintaining, and I honestly don't know how I did it. And I'm not trying to feel sorry for myself. That was not the case. I was having the time of my life on a plane pretty much every 6 to 10 days, running all over the country here in the US, all over the world, meeting incredibly inspiring people. I mean, I was just so hungry for all of that activity, but it was really exhausting. And I just remember around that kind of 2019 feeling like, whew, man, it's time to take a step back and just process some of this. I was just running so hard. I didn't take time to sit back and say, what am I doing all of this for? And what problems am I really curious about? And where is all this going? And where would I like to be in the conversation? I was just busy doing instead of being. So then add a global pandemic to the equation, and you get a lot of time to sit in one place and answer those questions. And I'm certainly not excited about a global pandemic. Let me be real clear. The tragedy and the hardship that is felt on especially vulnerable communities and a lot of folks in city government and government of all kinds and the service nonprofit sector is of course, just can't even talk about it. It's so obvious. But it gave me a chance to pause and say, okay, what's been happening? What is missing? Where can I be of service? Because I have this interesting view of kind of being at the 30,000 foot level. How can I help to influence this in a positive way? And that's what I've really been focused on.
And I guess, so in 2018, I feel you as well. 2018, 2019, I was running full speed at and I wasn't really sure if there was a brick wall or, whatever else was at the end of it. But it was a bit wild. But also loved it. Time of my life. I totally agree. And then the brick wall, I guess, came with the pandemic. But then I realized actually it's not a brick wall. It's a veil. We can push through this, but it's different. It has really shaped what we are focusing on. And I've seen projects get pulled, but other projects get added. So it's been this balance. And I agree. I wouldn't see it as a positive thing, but there's definitely the silver linings that have come out of it. But also fully appreciating that the privileged position that I find myself in of being able to work from anywhere in this space as well. And thanks for bringing like the communities that are really suffering. And I think we're not talking about that enough. And we know that that's something in the smart community space that's so important as well and needs to be a focus moving forward. So I guess what are some of your key projects that you're really excited about, either completing or that you've started during this time?
Yeah, I started looking at where are the cities that are doing and implementing some of the work that I think is really groundbreaking. And I am paying more attention and spending more deliberate time there. What are some of the companies, a lot of them startups, doing some really intentional work that I think moves this sector forward? And I started pulling that together because, again, I was starting to create this frenzy. I'm like, okay, slow down. We've learned some things in a couple of years. Let's systematize this. And so I created what I'm calling the Smarter Cities Toolkit. And it's really just 5 very simple steps that happens really before smart city project implementation. And if it's helpful, I can read through those 5 steps. They're pretty simple concepts. The first of them is ecosystem mapping and defining community stakeholders, not just the obvious ones, but the folks who were never asked for their opinion. I think that is so incredibly important. And there's a tool called Kumu. There's a free version, and it does a really beautiful job of digitally mapping and visually mapping all of this stuff. The second part of it, and this is important for every single community to do, it doesn't matter if you are a village of 5,000 people or you're a city of 5 million people, you have to go through the process of inventorying your existing city efforts, smart city efforts. I cannot tell you how many times where I've had the ability to, or the opportunity to sit in the middle of a city and talking with different departments. And they're saying, oh, I didn't even know you were doing this. And some of the challenges that they're both facing, they just don't know what everyone is doing. And so that inventory, while it might be painful to go through and map it, is really, really important. And then the third piece, and this is what I'm getting really excited about, is creating a data-informed equity roadmap. So that's going in and cataloging everything in your community in that built environment. Where are communities that are facing vulnerabilities? What are some of the indicators that are applied to those communities? These are things like how walkable is our neighborhoods? Where are there blighted areas? What transportation options are there? Food options, just the basics of having a quality of life in a community. The built environment shows you that. And then through all sorts of different analytics engines, you can map that and the data will tell you not only what the current scenario is, but how that can be improved. And I'm just over the moon excited about the opportunity to do things different because we have data to inform those decisions now. And then that piece of it, especially when it's visualized, offers a really cool opportunity to co-create with citizens and residents in ways that we haven't been able to do before, because some of this stuff is intangible. You can't touch it or feel it. It's hard to talk about. Everyone has a different kind of point of view and an agenda, but the data is the data. And when it's visualized properly, it just invites a different kind of conversation. And then the fifth part that is, again, a little bit harder and a little touch of woo-woo, which I don't mind, is that you can use that to inform your community values and the guiding principles of what makes up your community. And that will not be the same for everyone. And that is a beautiful thing. So that's some of the work that has a little bit to do with technology, but a whole lot to do with people and how we envision what our cities look like.
Yeah, it's so interesting because doing a lot of smart city, strategy work and smart community strategy work at the moment, and those steps are so important, and I think they can be missed, which is wild to think about. But also, if we only focus on the technologies, okay, tell me a list of technologies that I should buy, then they will get missed because it's not seen as important enough. But, mapping the ecosystem, like you said, and the one that I love the most is, well, not that I love the most, but one that is the most fun is getting departments to talk to each other about the projects and things that they're doing, right? Because it's like, oh, I didn't know you were doing this. And, oh, I didn't. And sometimes it takes someone like a consultant or whatever to come in, or a translator, someone to come in and just say, oh, you're doing all these bits and pieces, and then playing that back to the council or government or whoever it is. And so many insights can come out of that, whether it's, projects that are doing exactly the same thing, or data that can be shared, or partnerships that can happen. And not just within the council as well, across the whole community, right? This isn't just about the government. So that's really important. And yeah, I love the equity inclusion space as well, and what the data can actually tell us is really, really important. And the fact that we have tools now, and also experts that have this on their radar, if that makes sense. This cross-section of people that know the tools are available. Maybe they're not the ones that are doing the coding, but they know and they can access this, but also that they have the interest to be able to, and the expertise to do it properly. Because I think that's really important too, because people, I think, in the smart city space, and if coming in from the outside, might think it's, motherhood statements and technology. But when you actually can see this action and see the mapping and see all these things happening, it's really, really powerful. Is there any other projects you want to talk through before we zoom to the future?
Yeah, well, there's two kind of shout outs that I want to give. And just real quick, I had a thought while I was inspired while you were talking. And it's just, I've been a little shocked to discover how little creative time is available to government and staff and city leaders. And again, I'm trying to couch my American perspective, but just on the municipal level, they're so busy just implementing so many projects and so many things that they don't have time to do just that piece of it, much less think creatively about how to envision a very dynamic system of cities as they're changing. I don't know how they do it, to be totally honest with you. And we're seeing a lot of stats around people in city government and just government in general really hitting burnout and wanting to take a break, which of course I have complete compassion for. And I just think the acknowledgement that we are in a transformative time and we need time and space, permission and incentives to think creatively, not just with people in our department or within city hall walls, but outside of the community. And that can feel a little risky, but it's really critical. And the cities who are doing that, or the cities that are doing that, I think are pushing in the right direction. One of those cities is San Antonio. I live in Austin, Texas, and San Antonio is about an hour and a half to 2 hours down I-35, depending on whatever's happening with the horrible traffic. But they have an innovation office at the city that is doing such a beautiful job of reaching out to other city departments, reaching out to public agencies, reaching out to the county, reaching out to state agencies. They work really well with the community. They have interlocal data sharing agreements. They have MOUs with their universities. I mean, it is just the template, I think, of how these things can work. And it's different for everybody, every community. But I really, really love the work that they're doing. And then in Philadelphia, again, it's just inspiring people within city government who won't take no for an answer. And they just think creatively about how to problem solve. And I've got lots of examples of all of their projects on Digi.City. So I invite people to check those out.
Yes, I was just making some notes there about, because I'm just like, I love that, because another of my favorite things is to connect councils with councils. And you think, oh, that's easy and that's obvious, but it doesn't happen as much as possible, or as we think. And particularly in the smart city space, it gives you an avenue to do that as well, because like data sharing and all those things are so important, but also the lessons learned. What didn't work? Because I think like things don't work, right? And councils, governments, everybody in general is so vilified if they fail, which is, a thing that we need to shift. But we need, I guess, braver, not even braver, just we need to shift that so then we can actually have those conversations. But in the first instance, having council to council conversations or government to government, again, I'm bringing the Australian perspective, is really, really key. But I also love that I've had both of those cities on the podcast, and I also love what they're doing in the space. And it's real, right? And it's not about the latest tech. It's about their communities and what their communities really need. And actually, Emily from Philadelphia has not come out yet. I've recorded it. Oh my God, actually, I'm just about to record her intro, and I'm so excited to release that episode because it's just amazing. They're doing such awesome things. But thanks for those shout outs, because I think people can go, we can link some stuff to, people can go away and have a look at those. It's interesting because on the podcast as well, the episodes that get the most listens, other than obviously this one, which will get amazing listens, is the councils, right? Is the local governments in Australia and around the world, because we're not used to hearing from them yet. And I that's changing, and I'm loving that as well. And so people are just, they're hungry to know what councils are doing, but also listen to passionate people within councils, because particularly in Australia, that, I guess that public servant kind of, view, or the public view of the public servant is not necessarily a positive one all the time. And I think that's what we want to shift. And that's why I love working with councils on this stuff, because they are progressive enough, not even progressive, whatever the word is, to actually be thinking about these things, and people want to hear about it and want to make change, right?
Yeah, I experienced this kind of for the first time in Manchester in the UK. And I just walked away from that city just saying, wow, it is possible. And it was at a time where I was like, oh God, are we ever going to get it right? I don't know if the US can pull this off. It's just, everything's so polarized and bifurcated. And I saw where cities like Manchester and Dublin, where they started, some pretty deep divides, some pretty economically challenging times. And they used the strength of community to change the temperature. And they figured out how to co-create and collaborate. And it created just this strength. And it's not just around smart cities, it's around using technology fairly and justly to address challenges that many people in the community were facing. I'm like, yes, this is it. So just shout out to those communities too. It kind of reignited my spirit. And then I just went on a mad search to find people like Emily Yates, who were literally doing it step by step. She's such a rock star.
Oh, she is. And no, I totally agree. And like, councils that I've been working with in Australia, like Camden Council in New South Wales and Moreton Bay Regional Council in Queensland, there's people in there, and it's not just one person, right? Because one person, they drive and drive and drive for so long, and then they get burnt out, like you were saying earlier. But when you've got this community, and also start creating this culture, even developing the strategy starts creating a culture. And however the strategy ends up, whether it's not bits and pieces, that's not the right way, whether it's integrated throughout all of the other strategies, or whether it's a standalone and then aligned and linked with others, whatever the case is, because we're still learning, we're still growing, we're still moving. But having those people within there, it also, ignites my excitement, and it's like, oh no, I'm not some crazy person that thinks this is possible. But the other council, and obviously it was a while ago now in 2019 when I was doing my fellowship, Amsterdam. Like, I went and visited them, and the vibe, just like you go into their office, which is like a startup thing, but it's not because that was a cool thing to do at the time. It was because that's where they wanted to work, and and just the vibe there was amazing. And I just went, oh wow, people can love or feel really honored to work in the government, right? And passionate about this, which is again, made me really excited and kickstarted me, or kept me going, because it can get, and particularly COVID's, it's quite draining, but then lifting back up again is something really important.
Yeah. And look how the energy of that space, and I love the word you said, culture, how that energizes you. And you're one of the most inspired, forceful, change making people in this space. Now imagine how that radiates to folks who are like, oh, I can't do it. Oh, it's not possible. It'll never happen. It's just contagious, which I know is a polarizing word in the middle of a pandemic, but contagious in a positive way. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking at the time. We could talk for hours, but we got to go to the future. Let's zoom to the future now. And what are the emerging trends that people aren't talking about enough?
Yeah, I think it's going to be all about data visualization, and, a lot of appropriate time and energy has been spent on collecting PII, personal data on people, their movements, their habits. And of course, that's what's moving the market in terms of advertising dollars and some of the big tech companies. But I think the most exciting piece of it is collecting data on our static urban built environment and using that data to make smarter decisions about how we can increase access, transparency, equity, all of the things that make every community more resilient. It doesn't just benefit one group of people, it benefits the entire community, and creating the stories around that. And I don't mean the made up stories, but translating it in a way that everyone can understand that and depoliticize it. I think that's so, so exciting. And I think it can be really transformative for our communities. One group that's doing that, and I learned about them through Emily in Philadelphia's State of Place, startup out of the founders and academic, and used kind of her academic thesis and thought, oh, maybe there's a way to scale this to communities. The work is powerful. So totally encourage everyone to go check it out.
We'll put the link in the show notes, because I think it's a really key point. Like assets, I think, and our government and our governments in particular have a lot of assets, and to be able to make us more resilient is so important. And I think we haven't quite made, or we continue to build that link, or to, increase that relevancy between assets and resilience, and the fact that smart cities can help us do that, and smart communities can help us do that. But also I think we underestimate, or we overestimate, people's ability to understand points in a spreadsheet over when we can see it visually, right? Like, I've been doing a project recently, and I was creating a virtual road condition score for Moreton Bay Regional Council, and had all these numbers and blah, blah. As soon as I took it out of the code and put it onto the map, I went, oh, I've done it. It's worked, and you can see it. And you tweak the code and you make that all better and all that kind of stuff as well. But when you can actually see it, it gives you this sense of like, oh, now it's real. And I think that feeling, and particularly with the community, is something that we can't undervalue for sure. And I'm excited about data visualization too.
Absolutely. And there's some really exciting work coming out of the City Science Lab in Hamburg, and they're partnering, one of the few projects the UN is doing with that group, called Unitech. It's really, really cool. And I'll send links to all of this stuff, but it's also a collaboration with MIT. So I'm not doing it justice by describing it, but I'll send you bunches of links so everybody can click and nerd out. I had the great opportunity to talk pretty in depth with some of their researchers and scientists. And I think that they are setting the bar so high, and it can be, a real kind of roadmap. It can be a system that other communities can copy. And that's part of their initiative, is just to make it accessible for everyone. So in Austin, in just a few weeks, which is inspiring, but also nerve-wracking, we're going to be having South by Southwest for the first time since it was canceled back in 2020. And some of those scientists and some of those thinkers are coming to South by Southwest, and I'm hoping they're going to bring some of their tools with them. So it'd be really fun to see that at work.
Amazing, amazing. Now, Chelsea, it's been so great to have you on the podcast. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I think we'll have to have another one real soon. And I'm hoping we can also, somehow meet up in person, in real life, in 3D sometime soon as well, with everything opening up and when it's safe to do so. So thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for just providing this space. It's so important. And it's always so much fun to talk with you.
Thank you. Now, one last question. How can people connect with you?
Find me on Digi.City, which is www.digi.city. And I'm Chelsea at Digi.City. And of course, all of the associated social media networks. So yeah, happy to talk with whoever has ideas, inspirations, questions, challenges, whatever. Get in touch.
Excellent. We'll put all the links in the show notes so people can click away and find you. Thank you again for coming on to the podcast once again, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Same. Me too. Thanks so much.
Talk soon. Bye.
Bye.
The Smart Community podcast is brought to you by My Smart Community. If you're trying to deal with disruption, not sure what technologies to buy, need to facilitate genuine collaboration, then we can help. Email hello@mysmart.community or head to www.mysmart.community/consulting.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes are available on our website, mysmart.community/podcasts. If you have any questions for us or any of our guests, you can email hello@mysmart.community. You can also find us on the socials. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter at SmartComHQ. That's com with 2 M's. If you are enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And we would love for you to leave us a rating and review at wherever you listen. This really helps us reach more ears and eyes, so thank you for your support. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.